Have you ever sat down on a Zoom meeting, a high-stakes one? You know, when you think that credibility is built in real time and first impressions matter? Have you been there? Have you felt that nervous? Well, I was sitting in one of those a couple of years ago. I was presenting the start of my new project to a very renowned academic institution. And halfway through, I heard it. The cry of my baby. Loud and clear, drilling into my brain. At first, I was startled, but I kept going. I had to be professional. But he would not stop. I remember thinking, well, I have the option, I can stop my talk now, but then I would lose credibility. I would lose my ground. Or I continue, but then I will show something that is supposed to be hidden. Guess which one I chose? I picked up my baby, adjusted the camera slightly, and breastfed him. All the way while I was presenting, answering questions, until I finished. What really struck me about that experience is that nobody said anything. Everybody else pretended this was not happening. They just kept going without a single comment, no acknowledgement. But something shifted in me that day. Because for the first time in such a rigid structure, like academia, I dared to show something that is meant to be invisible. And from that moment on, the rules that I was operating under would change forever. When I was little, I changed schools. And the first day of my new school, I was very afraid. I did not want to go. I was little, new friends, new environment. And my mother, in her loving wisdom, just came to me and said, "Las personas inteligentes se adaptan a las circunstancias. Smart people adapt to changing circumstances." She meant it back then as wisdom, as comfort. But boy, did I take that seriously. And honestly, to me, it made sense. After all, in biology, adaptation equals survival. The organisms that adapt, they thrive and persist. And those that don't, well, don't. So I applied it everywhere. I moved countries, changed disciplines, reinvented my career more than once. And every time, I used the same successful recipe. I entered the new environment. I studied it, learned the rules, adapted, succeeded. That took me very far, and I was happy, ambitious, and I believed deeply that if I continued with this method, I would achieve all of my dreams, and there were many. Until I became a mom. You see, motherhood wasn't just hard. It was different, structurally different. Because it not just changed my body, it changed my brain, it changed my mind, it changed my emotional ability, my identity, all at the same time. But I was still the same person. I was still ambitious. I was still committed. I was still capable. But it didn't feel like that. Because the work environment around me demanded something very specific from me. Full availability, full mobility, and a sort of bodily invisibility. Because you see, the ideal worker has a neutral body, unencumbered, replaceable. And mine wasn't anymore. So at first, I did, obviously, what I have done before. I tried to adapt harder. I tried to optimize more. And I compressed myself into this rigid system until I couldn't. And that's when I started pretending that my body wasn't there. That Zoom meeting was one time. Another time was when I refused to travel for work. There was this very important conference where I had to present my findings. But I was still breastfeeding at the time. And they didn't offer childcare. So I took a decision. I chose to stay. And that refusal mattered deeply. Not because anyone had said so, but because in academic environments, availability is read as full commitment. And with that choice, I was exactly knowing what I was trading. And I didn't do that because I wanted to be rebellious. I did that simply because I wanted to name that cost out loud. Looking back, and I remember thinking, well, this must be a work problem, science. Then I thought maybe it's just a motherhood problem. But honestly, I mostly felt this is a me problem. Until I got pregnant a second time. Because that is when I started seeing the same logic, but somewhere else. In medicine. 12 weeks after I gave birth, I'm sitting in front of my gynecologist, telling her everything that was going on with my body and with my mind. And what I get from her was, no. What you're feeling is not postpartum depression. No. Look, it's dark outside. It's winter in Berlin, and it's the first year with a newborn. This is supposed to be feeling this hard. Push through. You'll be fine. And, just to distract yourself, just visit some baby classes. Okay, thank you. Very wise advice. Different settings, same message. Minimize the cost, normalize the pain, privatize the strain. I did listen to one thing that a gynecologist told me. I did go to the baby classes, but not because I was bored, but because of research. I wanted to know what other women were experiencing. And so in these classes, you have to imagine we're sitting all in a circle on these very soft mats, surrounded by each other's exhausted faces, and cuteness crawling all around us. And I remember one time, this one woman shared a story, almost whispering. She said, I wonder when leaking will stop after childbirth. Because it's been months, and I don't think that this is normal. And after she said this, the room shifted. Another woman looked up and said, me too. I have exactly the same problem. And then another one went, me too. And a fourth one, and a fifth one started sharing about other symptoms. And all of a sudden, the room changed because what had felt like an individual inability became the shared reality. Different symptoms, different bodies, but we all shared the same fear, the same shame, and the same loneliness. What struck me back then wasn't the symptoms themselves. It was their explanation. or rather, the lack of one. Because we didn't know that this could happen. We were not trained to understand how our bodies work. So when these symptoms appear after childbirth, we took them as personal failures instead of biology, normal biology and the recovery process. And that is when things started shifting for me. Because I understood something that was not clear to me. This behavior, this mentality is quite natural, because in different settings, let it be a workplace, or at your doctor's, or even in parenting spaces, when things start going wrong, automatically we turn the lens inward, which is great, it shows responsibility. But what happens when thousands of people across different settings are reaching the exactly same breaking point? What happens then? I don't think that this is personal anymore. It is a pattern, a signal that the design logic of these systems is flawed. That the design logic is meant for individuals to carry the burden that the organizations and the settings are the ones responsible for. And once I saw it like that, I couldn't unsee it, and I could not see it any other way. And I realized that we tend to treat certain human transitions, like motherhood, as private. Private processes that every single individual should manage alone. But are they private? They're not. They are structural. And when systems are under-designed, adaptation stops being smart. Adaptation stops being intelligent. It becomes exploitation. In under-designed systems, silent adaptation is how the burden gets transferred onto every single one of us. And what happens is that when those individuals break and reach their limits, we rename the failure. Burnout, personal choice, lack of resilience. And don't get me wrong, resilience is virtuous, but only when it helps you grow. But I think that it is a liability when it prevents systems from fixing themselves. So what I learned from this is to reframe what I had learned. And I stopped asking, oh, how do I adapt better to this system? And every time now I enter a new environment, I ask, is this setting asking something from me that it should be carrying itself? And that completely reshaped the way I work and what I work on. Today, I spend my days doing mostly two things. First, I teach about women's biology, not for trivial purposes, but as an infrastructure. Because when we understand what goes on in human bodies, we will stop treating these transitions as moral failures. And we will treat them as design inputs. And second, I am building tools to accompany women during their postpartum journey. Not to optimize them, not to fix them, but to make this very human transition supported and navigable. And I feel that this is my responsibility to do this. Because if systems only thrive when good people suffer silently and individually, then this is not a good system. It is just a well-subsidized one. Looking back at my education and the first time that it changed, I realized something. When I was little and the school and the system around it stopped serving me, my parents did not ask me to endure. They didn't ask me adapt harder. They changed the environment around me. And somewhere along the line, I had forgotten that message. Instead, I bought into this idea, one that is very seductive, especially for high achievers, that adaptation is always the most mature option there is. Motherhood gave me that lesson back. Motherhood was a present because it changed me from that rigid scientist all the way in a current to become an entrepreneur. And I listened this time. I listened deeply. And what I carry with me now is that adaptation is smart, and smart people do adapt to changing circumstances. But wisdom is knowing when adaptation serves you, but when it is time to change those circumstances. Thank you.